Kyle Busch over the weekend called out the lack of respect on the racetrack. Busch Beer still favorited to leave Stewart Racing ahead to Trackhouse Racing in 2024 to sponsor Ross Chastain, and Kurt Busch and Gunther Steiner will join the Fox Sports booth at Circuit of the Americas. What's going on, guys? It's Daniel, and welcome back to your video. We got a ton of NASCAR and other motorsports stories discussed here today on the channel. Let's go ahead and just jump straight into those really quickly. We're going to start by talking about Black Rifle Coffee, as it was announced on Friday that Black Rifle Coffee is going to sponsor Noah Gragson in 2023 for 6 races, including this upcoming weekend at Circuit of the Americas. Black Rifle Coffee, I believe, has been sponsoring Noah Gragson now since 2019 season, so really great to see it continue their partnership with Noah Gragson. They were expected to sponsor Noah, and it's really exciting to see they'll continue to sponsor Noah Gragson for multiple races in 2023. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Quaker State. As it was announced on Sunday morning that Quaker State is going to sponsor Daniel Suarez for multiple races in 2023 at Richmond in a couple weeks and Atlanta in July. It was also announced they are going to still sponsor the July Atlanta race as well. Really awesome stuff. See, Quaker State is going to continue their partnership with the Atlanta race, and also excited to see that Daniel Suarez has a new sponsor. Quaker State has rumored they were going to sponsor Trackhouse Racing this season, so really awesome to see. They'll be sponsoring Trackhouse Racing in 2023. They've been really doing a good job picking up partners, and glad to see continue their sponsorship with the team. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about 2311 Racing. Now, Adam Stern put out a tweet on Sunday afternoon that 2311 Racing, they put out a tweet saying firefighters held the training exercise at the new location for the 2311 shop. A lot of people were concerned there was actually a fire at the 2311 Racing shop. Luckily, it was just a training exercise at the new facility when the new facility comes into play. It's really cool they're doing this, trying to get everybody prepared for that situation when it does come up into play, and I think it's really cool that 2311 Racing decided to have a demonstration in regards to that when it comes to that when the new location. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Joshua Creech. Now, there were a lot of penalties over the weekend. Of course, you had Hendrick Motorsports a penalty, and of course, they're appealing. We'll be talking about them later in this episode. We got Denny Hamlin to talk about as well. But another suspension that kind of came into play was Joshua Creech, as basically it was reported that Joshua Creech has been sent an indefinite suspension penalty. Well, now, why is he getting a penalty? Well, apparently he had stolen a lot of VIP passes. He works for Jeremy Clements Racing, and basically he was stealing a lot of VIP passes. If you do that, you get indefinite suspension and a $25,000 fine. His hard car basically got pulled. You can't do that, in my opinion, because that is against the NASCAR rules, and if you do that, you're going to get a penalty. So, sadly for Joshua Creech, unfortunately, he has an indefinite suspension. He won't be appealing it, of course, but not a surprise or shock. If you steal something like that, you're not also going to be able to appeal it. So, in my opinion, great decision by NASCAR. You can't be stealing that stuff, in my opinion. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about the Chicago Street Course. As there was a tweet that Adam Stern put out on Friday afternoon or Friday morning. The Chicago Street Course is a lot of talk about concerns over traffic going into the weekend. Now, according to the article, if you actually read the article, NASCAR already has a plan in place to get this traffic figured out and the traffic sorted out. But it's very interesting to see that we're going to see a lot of hit pieces. Because again, as we get closer to the race, you're going to continue to see a lot of hit pieces toward the Chicago Street Course, because the Chicago people are not happy about the Chicago Street Course overall. So as time continues on, you're going to see a lot more talk about the fact that a lot of people are not a big fan of the Chicago Street Course, and I'm not surprised that we're seeing hit paces come out left, right, and center. So, in my honest opinion, not a big shock or surprise that we're seeing some frustration about Chicago Street Course, and that it's not a surprise to me, in my opinion. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Jack Harvey. As it was announced on Friday, and Jack Harvey revealed on Twitter that he has been medically cleared to race at Texas Motor Speedway. Now, Jack Harvey did not go to the test. I think it was a Sebring, I can't remember, or maybe India, I'm not entirely sure. But Yuri Vips basically was in substitution for him. Jack Harvey, of course, suffered an accident in the season opening race at the Grand Prix of St. Petersburg. But now he's been medically cleared to race at Texas. I'm very happy for him that he has been medically cleared. I think Jack Harvey needs to run the whole season. This is basically a make or break year for Jack Harvey, so he wants to be out on the racetrack as quick as possible. Luckily, he's been medically cleared to race in Texas. Happy to see him back on the racetrack, and happy that he will be racing here in the near future in Texas. I think that's not this week, but next week, so the next race for IndyCar is Texas. Looking forward to that for sure, that he'll be cleared to race for that. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Kyle Weatherman. As Kyle Weatherman put a photo on Sunday morning talking about that he basically had a sprain on his arm. Basically had a little bit of a cast on his arm and had a sprain on his arm after suffering a crash at Atlanta Motor Speedway. On lap 15 or 16 of the race, we saw Kyle Weatherman hit the outside wall really, really hard with a flat, I believe, right front or right rear tire and hit the outside wall extremely hard. Kyle Weatherman will hopefully have a speedy recovery. He is still expected, I believe, to race this upcoming weekend at Circuit of the Americas. So excited he'll be back out on the racetrack there. Wishing speedy recovery for him, and hopefully he'll be good enough to go racing because I want to see Kyle Weatherman out on the racetrack. I think Weatherman is an extremely talented and a great driver. In my opinion, I think he's a fantastic driver overall. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about Black Flags Matter. Now, if you watched the NASCAR and Fox pre-race, you're going to notice that fellow NASCAR YouTuber Darian Gilliam, a.k.a. Black Flags Matter, was on the pre-race show. Darian is one of the best NASCAR YouTubers currently in the game, in my honest opinion, and to see that he's on the NASCAR and Fox pre-race show is absolutely really, really awesome and really, really cool. If he ends up watching this, man, congratulations on getting on the NASCAR and Fox show. You absolutely deserve it. You've worked really, really hard to get these opportunities, and the fact that now you've got an opportunity to be on NASCAR and Fox, I thought was absolutely awesome and absolutely incredible. So congratulations to him on getting on NASCAR and Fox. Really exciting stuff, and overall pretty happy to see that he will be was on NASCAR Fox at the pre-race show. Pretty cool stuff and pretty exciting stuff overall for sure. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about Saudi Arabia. Now, Adam Stern put out a tweet on Friday that Saudi Arabia says it could host 2 F1 races in the near future. Obviously, this past weekend, we had the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix that took place. We talk about that later in this episode. But, of course, they're talking about having another race in Saudi Arabia. Now, it won't be at the Jeddah circuit. It will be at a different circuit. Obviously, Saudi Arabia brings a lot of money. I know Saudi Arabia is a very controversial country, but when you have a lot of money bringing in, F1's going to try to get that money. So I think in the future, you're going to see another race in Saudi Arabia in the not-so-distant future. When it will happen, maybe next year, who knows, as F1 is talking about maybe expanding the schedule going into the future. I'm not a big fan of them having their race in Saudi Arabia, but again, when they have a lot of money coming into play, you're going to have more races in that respective area. So not a shock or surprise. There's a lot of conversation about having another race in Saudi Arabia, in my opinion. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about Blake Bainbridge. As it was announced on Friday, and Bob Pockers reported on this, that Blake Bainbridge is going to be the crew chief for Stewart Friesen. Now, Stewart Friesen has already started working with Blake Bainbridge at Atlanta Motor Speedway, and I think Stewart Friesen kind of struggled in that race and didn't get the finish that he deserved. I think he finished like 19th or 20th in the truck race, if I'm not mistaken. Blake Bainbridge has been a respected crew chief for a long time. He's actually part of Rusty Wallace Racing back in the day, and we've seen him bring some decent success for the Rusty Wallace Racing Group back in the day. So really excited to see he's getting the opportunity to be the crew chief for the team going forward. Pretty cool to see that, and hopefully Blake Bainbridge can bring some success for Stewart Friesen because he's been struggling to start 2023. Hopefully he can turn the corner around and do a really good job the rest of the season with Stewart Friesen. Hopefully Bainbridge can bring the success the team needs. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about Kevin Harvick. As during the Truck Series broadcast, FS1 revealed that Kevin Harvick will be in the Truck Series booth at Circuit of the Americas. Now, of course, Kevin Harvick will join the Fox Sports booth on a full-time basis and for the Cup Series in 2024. So they've been giving Kevin Harvick a lot of experience for getting into the booth. Kevin Harvick, I think, is going to really help that Truck Series booth. This past week in Atlanta, in my opinion, I don't think they did a really, really good job. I'm not sure if Jamie Little will be the lead commentator or Adam Alexander will be the lead commentator. I hope it's Adam Alexander because Adam Alexander, in no disrespect Jamie Little, but Adam Alexander is miles better than Jamie Little. That being said, though, I'm excited to see that Kevin Harvick is going to be getting in the Fox Sports booth for the truck race at COTA. I think he's going to do a really, really good job. In my opinion, I'm so excited and looking forward to he will be joining the booth at COTA. I'm really looking forward to that. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Garrett Smithley. Now, after the NASCAR Xfinity Series race, Garrett Smithley went on Twitter and apologized for getting frustrated on the radio. Garrett Smithley, during the Xfinity Series race, there was really interesting spotter communication that came out from Garrett Smithley's team, and Garrett Smithley was very, very frustrated on the radio with the spotter. He says it's been a frustrating year, has not been a good year for the team, and he's been jumping around with multiple organizations, has not gotten the finishes that he has deserved so far this season. I can understand Garrett Smithley's frustration. It's been a bad year for him so far this year. He was supposed to run full-time with BJ McLeod Motorsports, missed the first 2 races of the season, and it's just been a struggling year for that team so far with the 4-car. I really hope that he can turn the season around. It's just been a frustrating year, and I completely understand why he was frustrated and why he was pissed off. I'd be mad too if I've had as bad of a start as I've had to the 2023 season. Hopefully he can turn the corner around and turn the season around going forward as we get closer to 2024. Hopefully he can turn the season around though in 2023. Hopefully he can turn it around. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Balthazar Leguzuma. As it was announced on yesterday, that MBM Motorsports announced yesterday that Balthazar Leguzuma will not make his NASCAR Xfinity Series debut at Circuit of the Americas. Balthazar Leguzuma was supposed to make his debut at MBM this upcoming weekend at Circuit Americas. Unfortunately, due to not having any sponsorship or funding, or the funding not coming through for the team, he will not make his debut at COTA. Now, he still remains in good terms with the team, so it's still potentially possible that we could see Balthazar Leguzuma make his debut later this season. It's just a shame because it'd been really cool to see Balthazar get an opportunity to race MBM Motorsports, but he still will have an opportunity and a chance and a shot to make that debut in the near future, hopefully. So hopefully they can bring the sponsorship funding going forward, and Balthazar can make his debut in the Xfinity Series sometime later this season. Now we'll go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the 12 hours of Sebring. Now, on Saturday night, we had the 12 hours of Sebring, and it looked like it was going to be a Penske Porsche going to victory lane. But with about 20 laps to go, or 20 minutes to go for that matter, we saw the top 3 leaders take each other out. We saw the 6 Porsche Penske car, the 7 Porsche Penske car, and the 10 Wayne Taylor Racing car take each other out, giving the lead to the 31 for Action Express Racing, and they would go on to win the race. Major congratulations to the number 31 team. Got to leave things at the top 3 taking each other out. In my opinion, Mateo Jaminet just unfortunately made a little bit of a mistake, but I don't think he intentionally ran Philippe Albuquerque off the track. Philippe had no traction, had a lot of speed, and unfortunately really had nowhere to go. It's really unfortunate situation what happened there, but it is what it is. But congratulations, Action Express Racing, on winning the 12 hours of Sebring and getting another win for Pippo Derani. And hey, Scott McLaughlin got a podium because Tower Motorsports ended up finishing 3rd overall. So congratulations to them on getting a podium and winning their class as well. Major congratulations to them on that front and on the aspect. Congratulations to them on that. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. Now, we had the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix before the NASCAR Cup Series race took place at Atlanta Motor Speedway, and of course, Saudi Arabian Grand Prix happened. And it will be pretty much dominated by Sergio Perez, with him going on to win his first race of the 2023 season. Now, Fernando Alonso actually ended up also getting a podium. Initially, he did, then he didn't, and then eventually he was given the podium back. Sergio Perez, though, gets his first win of the 2023 season. Mass congratulations to them on winning the 2023 Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. A well-deserved win for him. Max Verstappen ended up finishing 2nd, really close behind. Well, about 4.5 to 5 seconds behind, I should say. Max ended up getting the fastest lap, so I believe Max Verstappen is still the points leader currently at the moment. But a great day for Red Bull once again, as once again they finished 1 and 2, but in opposite positions. Congratulations to both of them on that. Really exciting stuff. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Erik Jones. As there was basically a video that surfaced by AJ Traffic Paradise on Twitter, a basic service showing that Erik Jones on the last lap basically sent it. Erik Jones actually ended up finishing in the top 10, but basically he sends it through the middle, goes up there, passes 4 or 5 cars on the last lap of the race, and ends up finishing in the top 10. That was an absolutely ballsy but incredible move that Erik Jones ended up making, and it basically benefited him and got a fantastic finish out of it. So massive congratulations to Erik Jones getting a good run at the end, his first top 10 of the 2023 season, but kind of a struggling start of 2023. So good to see him finally have a really good run at the end of the day. But I thought it was so impressive that Erik Jones on the last lap basically sent it to get a couple positions. It's really good stuff. And overall, very happy to see that Erik Jones sent that and got a great finish out of it, because I think it's fun that he was able to send it, and it's very, very funny that he just sent it through the middle and got the positions. Happy for Erik Jones to get the finish that he deserved, and I'm fairly happy for him. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Tommy Milner. Now, it's reported by Kobe Lamanoff, who's working in grid ranking at the moment, that Tommy Milner is trying to put a deal together to race in the NASCAR Xfinity Series. Now, basically, what he would run is a road course, because that's the goal for Tommy Milner, is if he is going to run in the NASCAR Xfinity Series, it would be on a road course track. Tommy Milner, for those who do not know, currently races in GT cars in the number 3 car for Corvette Racing. And the driver, I think, is a very talented driver. I know he doesn't have a lot of experience with stock cars, but GT cars are very similar to NASCAR stock cars. So I think he would be able to get up and acclimate up to speed really quickly with just a little bit of experience. And I'm really happy, and it would be really cool to see him get the opportunity to do this. It'd be fun for Tommy Milner to race in the NASCAR Xfinity Series, make a one-off start in Xfinity. We've seen a lot of drivers from GT and also from IMSA come over and race in NASCAR. So why not come race in NASCAR? It won't be at COTA, but hopefully maybe at Watkins Glen, maybe he'll come over and race and get some experience there. It'd be fun, and I would love for him to get the opportunity to race there. It'd be pretty fun overall if he got the opportunity to come out and race. I would love for him to get the opportunity. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we are talking about Caswell. As Tricon Garage announced on Sunday afternoon that Caswell will drive the one-car truck for Tricon Garage this upcoming weekend at Circuit of the Americas. Caswell has already made a start this past year with Tricon Garage in Las Vegas, and I believe Caswell ended up finishing in a respectful top 10 finish. I believe finished the second highest of all the Tricon Garage drivers, as Corey Hunt finished fourth at Las Vegas Motor Speedway. Caswell, in my opinion, very, very talented drivers. Had an up-and-down start 2023 with Sam Hunt racing this season. But this is a really good opportunity for him, and I will say that he's probably going to be a favorite to win that race at COTA. Tricon Garage has had some really strong speed so far throughout 2023. In my opinion, with Caswell getting the opportunity to race with Tricon Garage, I think he'll do a very awesome and a really, really great job. So I'm excited to see that he's getting the opportunity to race at COTA with Tricon Garage. I think he'll be a contender overall for the win, and I'm excited that he'll get the opportunity to race with Tricon. I think he's going to do awesome and a really good job with the team. Very happy he once again will get an opportunity to drive with Tricon Garage. Really looking forward to that. He'll get that opportunity to race for the team. Really exciting stuff. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Ross Chastain and Kevin Harvick. Now, near the end of the Atlanta Cup Series race, you had Kevin Harvick, who had the lead, and Ross Chastain in second. But with about 70 laps to go in this race, there was maybe at one point some contact between Ross Chastain and Kevin Harvick. But initially, it looked like there was contact, but after you watch the replay, you can actually clearly see that Ross Chastain never touched Kevin Harvick. Just the air in the back of the car on the front nose of Chastain's car turned Kevin Harvick around. Ross Chastain basically said there was no contact between both of them, and Kevin Harvick also agrees he didn't feel any sort of contact from Ross Chastain when he got interviewed. So, in my honest opinion, I think a lot of us jumped the gun on the fact we all blame Ross Chastain. I saw a lot of us blaming Ross Chastain on Twitter for the incident. When you look at the replay, Ross Chastain was not really at fault. I think we're not really giving Ross Chastain the benefit of the doubt in these situations, and I think we kind of should have. I don't understand why people won't give him the benefit of the doubt. That being said, though, I don't think Ross Chastain was at all at fault for the situation. I think he got a little bit, the gun jumped on him, in my opinion. He is not at fault for the incident. I think there's just a racing deal, and unfortunately, the air turned his competitor around. Just an unfortunate situation overall. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we are talking about Anthony Alfredo. Now, Anthony Alfredo basically had to put out a tweet. He basically sent an FAQ talking about the fact that a lot of people think that his car is leased from Arabian Motorsports. Well, he basically confirmed and spoke on BG Motorsports in a very positive light, because he basically confirmed that they are not basically getting other cars. They're not leasing cars from other organizations. These are true BG Motorsports cars. The only thing that they have is ECR engines. Yeah, a lot of it is because Anthony Alfredo has been very, very strong with this team this year, and a lot of people thought with BJ McCarty was going to struggle this year. But he's actually been surprisingly really, really good at points throughout 2023 and was one of the fastest cars at Atlanta this past weekend. So it's good to see their true BJ McCarty Motorsports cars. I know that BJ McCarty Motorsports now, I believe, is only a one-car team for 2023, which I think really, really helps. I'm excited to see that we've been seeing him have a lot of success and has some really strong success so far throughout the year. Overall, seeing BJ McCall Motorsports have more pace and speed is a great thing overall. And Anthony Alfredo, I think, has had a pretty solid start to 2023. And I know he didn't get the finish he really deserved, but Anthony Alfredo is a driver who could have a pretty decent year. And we'll see what he does and does end up continuing doing throughout the season. But I've been excited to see that he's been doing pretty good with the team so far. I'm happy about it and glad to see that he continues to do pretty good with the team. It's pretty exciting stuff overall, for sure, in my honest opinion. Really awesome stuff. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about Tony Stewart. As it was announced during the Fox broadcast that Tony Stewart is once again going to be in the Fox Sports booth for more races this season. He'll be in the Fox booth for 3 more races at Bristol Dirt, at Talladega, and the Coca-Cola 600. Pretty cool stuff. In my opinion, I don't think Tony Stewart's done a great job in the Fox Sports booth. He's been decent for sure, but I feel like Tony Stewart doesn't have the complete energy that I thought he was going to have. He's very analytical, but I feel like at times Tony Stewart is a little bit too quiet for being in the Fox Sports booth. I don't want to see Tony Stewart getting like too intimidated and excited up there, but you got to be a little bit better than what he's been doing so far. But Tony Stewart has been a fan favorite for a lot of people, and I like seeing Tony in the booth. But if Tony's going to continue being in the Fox Sports booth as much as he has been, I need to see a little more animated Tony Stewart in the booth. Just a little more animated and a little more out there. Now, there were comments Tony Stewart made that I thought were really funny in the booth, and he wasn't least enjoyable. But that being said, I am happy he's going to be in the booth, but I need to see a little bit better from Tony Stewart going forward. But I'm happy that Tony will be back in the Fox Sports booth because, in my opinion, I love seeing Tony in the Fox Sports booth. But I need to see a little better from Tony Stewart going forward as he will be in the Fox Sports booth once again. Really exciting stuff, but he needs to do a little better in the Fox Sports booth, in my honest opinion. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Ross Chastain versus Alex Bowman. Now, after the NASCAR Cup Series race, Ross Chastain and Alex Bowman had a conversation on pit road, and it seemed like Alex Bowman was not happy. A lot of this is due to the fact that Ross Chastain and Alex Bowman had talked about working together and near the end of the race, and Ross Chastain basically left Alex Bowman out to dry, and Alex Bowman was not very happy about that. Look, it's the last lap of the race. I understand Alex Bowman being upset. When it's the last lap of the race, you're going to do what you're going to do, and you're going to try to go for the best position possible. And unfortunately, it cost Alex Bowman a top 10 finish because likely if Alex Bowman stays with Ross Chastain and Ross Chastain does work with Alex Bowman, likely Ross Chastain and Bowman end up finishing in the top 10, and they don't get passed by Erik Jones 3 wide. But when Ross Chastain did not stick with Alex Bowman, that cost Alex Bowman his first top 10 finish of the 2023 season. That being said, though, it's unfortunate. I know that Bowman and Chastain has had a lot of people he's made mad this year in the last couple of years. But in that situation, it's the last lap of the race. You're going for a really strong position. I get him being upset at Chastain for that situation. But in my honest opinion, I'm not surprised or shocked that Chastain's going for the best position because that's what the goal should be for Ross Chastain is to get the best finish in the best position possible out on the racetrack. So interesting to see the frustration for sure. But again, I'm not surprised or shocked that there's been some frustration between both of them. Nobody should be genuinely shocked or surprised about that, in my honest opinion. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Chase Elliott. Now, Chase Elliott basically went on Twitter and spoke on not being at Atlanta, his home racetrack, this past weekend. Chase Elliott on yesterday was really funny. If you were on Twitter yesterday, you saw Chase Elliott giving his opinions on the motocross race over the weekend, kind of gave his opinions on the Xfinity Series race and the Truck Series races as well yesterday, and also gave his opinion on not being out there. He's hoping to be back by July and will likely be back by July. Obviously, Chase Elliott still has not been medically cleared to go back to the racetrack at this point, and he will not be back at least for the next 3 races. The earliest he could return is Martinsville, but it might be a little bit later down the road when Chase Elliott does make a return to the racetrack. But I really hope Chase can return to the racetrack sooner rather than later. I miss seeing Chase Elliott out on the racetrack, and I hope he can be back on the racetrack as soon as possible because it doesn't really feel the same without Chase Elliott being there. It's kind of made these last year races kind of feel a little more dull than normal, and I think the fact that Chase Elliott is not out on the racetrack, I think is playing a role, and we also need Chase Elliott back in the car so the ratings can go up, but I don't want him to rush his recovery back to the racetrack, and I want his recovery to go as swell as possible so he can be healthy enough when he does get back out on the racetrack. So overall, my honest opinion, hope we will see Chase back on the racetrack soon. It will be at least 3 more races for sure until he gets back out on the track. But in my opinion, I hope we can see Chase back sooner rather than later. We'll have to wait and see what happens when he does get back on track. It's going to be fun, but I really hope he continue to recover from his injuries going forward. Hope he can continue to recover and get back to the racetrack as soon as possible. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Christopher Bell. As it was announced on Friday morning that Christopher Bell is going to drive the 61 for Tory Racing in the Truck Series at North Wilkesboro. This will be the first time that Christopher Bell has raced in the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series since 2018 season when he drove for Kyle Busch Motorsports. I think it's substitution for Noah Gragson, if I'm not mistaken. This is really, really exciting stuff. See Christopher Bell back behind the wheel of a truck. Tory Racing has some decent speed to start 2023, but you know that they are going to put some really strong performances together. Obviously, Tory Racing last year was a 2-truck team, but they downsized to 1 full-time truck for the season, and they have a second truck just as a part-time opportunity for part-time drivers to get an opportunity. It's interesting because we maybe thought go to Tricon Garage, but again, right now, Tricon Garage will have Taylor Gray in that. Maybe he gets in the 1 truck, and we thought maybe he goes in the 1 truck. But it is exciting stuff nonetheless. See Christopher Bell getting the opportunity to race once again. I think Christopher Bell will do a very solid job, and I think he will be a contender in the truck race. I think it'll be very competitive. I think it'll be very, very fast, and overall, I expect Christopher Bell to be a massive, massive contender in the Truck Series race later this year at North Wilkesboro. That race is also going to have William Byron, which I think is going to be really, really fun. William and Christopher at one point were teammates 2016. So I think that we'll see Christopher Bell do a very solid job, and I'm excited to see that he will be getting an opportunity to race in the Truck Series race at North Wilkesboro. Going to be some really exciting stuff for sure, in my honest opinion. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Atlanta Motor Speedway. Now, multiple drivers had some pretty frustrating words about Atlanta Motor Speedway, and they're not the only 2 that were really frustrated. Now, Justin Allgaier spoke during the Xfinity Series race after crashing out and basically called the new Atlanta Motor Speedway an embarrassment for the sport. Now, obviously, the NASCAR Xfinity Series race was a complete disaster and was really, really bad, and he called it an embarrassment for the sport. Kyle Larson called the first 2 stages really, really boring and basically said because Logano's car was so dominant that no one really could do anything against the 22 car. I'm going to give my honest opinion on New Atlanta Super Speedway. The end of stage 3 for the Cup race was really good. That was the only good moment of the weekend in general. The truck race was boring and a lot of wrecks and terrible pacing of the race. The Xfinity Series race was a disaster till the end of the race. It was a complete disaster. And then the Cup race, in my opinion, was the best race of the weekend by a mile. Stage 1 and Stage 2 were not fun, I'll say that. Stage 3, though, was really, really good. So maybe we could just have the Cup Series at Atlanta Super Speedway. That might be something we could do going forward. How about that, SMI? But I'm not a big fan of New Atlanta. I've said this. I'm not a fan of this track. I don't think the racing is good at New Atlanta, really, until the end. And no one did anything for the first 2 stages. And I agree with Kyle Larson. I thought it was pretty boring. I think there were good moments for sure of the race. Yeah, for sure. But I expect the racing to be better at this track. And I did not enjoy a lot of what I saw yesterday. So, not a big fan of New Atlanta. Ending was really, really good for the Cup race, but I personally am still not a big fan of New Atlanta. I wish that we got to see an next-gen car have an opportunity to race at the old Atlanta before they repaved it and reconfigured it. Again, they could have just repaved the track. Didn't have to reconfigure it, but they also do not make more opportunities to reconfigure other tracks like Texas. I know there's talk about reconfiguring Texas. Don't reconfigure into another super speedway because fans do not want that, and I don't want to see them do that. And I just hope they don't do that going forward with New Atlanta. Hope they decide to go back against that and decide not to go ahead and do that, in my opinion. Hopefully they decide not to do it. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about Hendrick Motorsports. Now, Chad Knaus, who of course works at Hendrick Motorsports as a higher up, he was basically spoke on the appeal that Hendrick Motorsports is currently having at the moment. Hendrick Motorsports, of course, is appealing the massive penalties that they ended up receiving over the week. All 4 cars got 100-point penalties, so 400 combined points. The largest fine in NASCAR history, $400,000 combined, and also all 4 crew chiefs were suspended. Now, obviously, for this past week, the crew chiefs basically did serve one of their weeks of suspension, so there's talk the appeal is going to be happening this week. But Chad Knaus also spoke on that and basically said that they basically did a voluntary inspection, and NASCAR basically had terrible communication with that. And basically, this is one of the parts where NASCAR and the teams have had communication. They say the lubricants are not correct. We've seen from some industry insiders that say that there's a chance that they could get their penalty reduced. Now, do I think that Hendrick Motorsports will get the penalty reduced? I don't think so. I think it's going to be very tough for them to win the case. But they may have a case here with the lubricant situation because, yes, they probably ended up modifying it. And again, you're not supposed to modify these parts. But if it basically is an issue where it's a fitting issue and you have to fit it, maybe sometimes you have to do things. I don't know. But Hendrick Motorsports, I'm glad they kind of came out and talked about this appeal. They're going to be appealing it. It sounds like, from what I understand, the appeal is going to be happening this week. I think Chris Meyer said that on the Fox Career show that the appeal is going to be happening this week, which isn't a big shock or a big surprise that they're appealing it because big penalties for Kyle Larson, William Byron, Alex Bowman, and also in some ways Josh Berry. Not Chase Elliott, of course, because Chase Elliott is not in the car currently at the moment. Hopefully he'll be back to the racetrack sooner rather than later. But it was a big penalty nonetheless for Hendrick Motorsports, and it did affect the team. And I'm glad that Chad Knaus kind of talked about that, basically, and it was a modifying issue, and basically it's been communication there. So not a big surprise or a shock that there was communication about that overall. Not a surprise about that in the slightest. In my opinion, not a big surprise. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Denny Hamlin. As Denny Hamlin basically announced on Friday that he's changed his mind and he will actually go ahead and appeal the penalties that he ended up receiving. This is not a surprise or a shock to me. He basically said that it was normal contact and normal racing, and Denny Hamlin did not get a penalty until he spoke his mind on his podcast. Initially, NASCAR was not going to do anything to Denny Hamlin, and they were not going to penalize him. But once Denny Hamlin opened his mouth on his podcast, that's when Denny Hamlin received a penalty. And he received a 25-point penalty and a $50,000 fine. Now, obviously, I thought there might be a penalty coming because he opened his mouth, but in my honest opinion, I don't think Denny Hamlin should have gotten as big a penalty, and I agree with Tony Stewart over the weekend. I think Jerry Jordan tweeted this out, if I'm not mistaken, but I believe that he said, that Tony Stewart said, this should be something that should be done once the racing done and everything is done, and they've talked, there should be no penalties coming for anybody. And I 100% agree with Tony Stewart on that front there. He talked about that on Saturday, and I 100% agree. And I think this is a good decision for Denny Hamlin to go ahead and appeal the penalty. And I personally think his penalty should get reduced. We'll have driver reactions here in just a little bit in that situation. But I really think that Denny Hamlin will have an actual chance to win his appeal. I think it's not going to be like the most favorable chance, but I think he does have a decent chance to go ahead and win the appeal. And again, I'm not surprised or shocked that he is going to appeal the penalties. It's a pretty big penalty overall for Denny Hamlin, where I think a little bit over harsh. I think a fine would have been justified at best, maybe like a $25,000 fine at best. But a $50,000 fine in 25 points is a little bit excessive. There should be no points penalty. The fact that he got penalized for opening his mouth is, I think, a little bit stupid and a little bit ridiculous, because to be allowed to open his opinion and open his mind on things and be allowed to speak his mind freely, and hopefully he will be able to go ahead and win his appeal. And I think he's got a good chance and good opportunity to potentially win that appeal. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Denny Hamlin. As Denny Hamlin, once again, we're talking about him, and Denny Hamlin was able to finally speak to media on the penalty and the stuff. And Denny Hamlin basically did not really say much. He basically said, get your Shingrix vaccinations. Shingrix really helped me out. He said he cannot wait for Atlanta. Basically doing what Kyle Busch did in 2017. Everything is great. Basically, he's trying to not get in trouble with the media and basically get in trouble with NASCAR for basically speaking his mind. Because Denny Hamlin, we know how outspoken of a driver he can really, really be. And obviously, I'm not surprised Denny Hamlin's kind of acting like this. I think some people think Denny Hamlin's acting childish with this. But when you're trying not to get in trouble with NASCAR for speaking your mind freely, I can't really blame him for basically doing this, basically keeping his mouth shut not trying to get into trouble. And I can't blame him for doing this. I really think it's not a surprise that basically Denny Hamlin's trying to keep his mouth shut in this situation. And I just thought it's funny, basically pulling a Kyle Busch. Everything is great. I love the fact that he's doing that, and I think it's really cool in general. Basically, his response I thought were really, really funny over the weekend. And Denny Hamlin spoke to the media in regards to the situation and basically just didn't really speak much. And everything's great. Did what Kyle Busch did in 2017 at Phoenix after basically him in Las Vegas when he got into a fight with Joey Logano. And Denny Hamlin basically talked about it. And we'll get into the drivers' reactions here in just a second to the Denny Hamlin penalty. But overall, it's interesting that he talked a little bit about the penalties. And I'm not surprised about that in the slightest. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the driver reactions to the Denny Hamlin penalty. Now, obviously, drivers over the weekend, we're going to talk about the reactions to the penalty. And obviously, multiple drivers spoke their mind on it. First, Dale Suarez on Sunday spoke, and he basically says that Denny Hamlin spoke and got the penalty he deserved. Basically, Denny Hamlin spoke what he wanted to say, got into Ross Chastain, and Denny Hamlin, if he would have not spoken his mind, he probably wouldn't have gotten a penalty. He basically spoke out to NASCAR and got a penalty there. I do somewhat agree with Dale Suarez in this situation, and also Dale Suarez is likely going to defend his teammate Ross Chastain, who of course is the one that had the contact, so that's why Dale Suarez probably is going to defend Chastain in that situation, but also Dale Suarez is, like I said, going to defend Chastain. Next, Mark Truex Jr., who of course is a teammate to Denny Hamlin, he says that he believes Denny Hamlin will win his appeal because where is the gray area in regards to that? Which I also agree. Where is the area to that where basically you can wait a couple days and give Denny Hamlin a penalty there? The fact that the communication and talking on a podcast basically give Denny Hamlin a penalty, I don't really agree with that. Finally, Ross Chastain, actually, he spoke out about the situation. He says it's really not my part to really talk about. And also, he will not go on Denny Hamlin's podcast. Denny Hamlin had actually invited Ross Chastain on his Actions that are Detrimental podcast to talk on there. But Ross Chastain basically has decided to not go on the podcast there. Like I said a few minutes ago, when it comes to Denny Hamlin and the penalty, I think some drivers believe that Denny Hamlin can win, and I think others believe Denny Hamlin is not going to win. I think Denny Hamlin does have somewhat of a chance and a shot to potentially win his penalty. I think there's a good chance he can potentially win, and overall, I think that Denny Hamlin, like I said, does have a decent chance to go out and win his appeal. Do I think he'll win it? We'll just have to wait and see, because it's going to be interesting to see what NASCAR does decide to do when it comes to that. I think Denny Hamlin will likely have his appeal sometime this week or next week. I know it took a while for Denny Hamlin to basically announce it, because he actually said on Wednesday that he wasn't going to appeal, and then 2 days later, he changed his mind and decided to appeal the penalties. Some drivers believe that he will win his appeal. Others believe that he will not win his appeal. I think there's a somewhat of a chance and a decent shot Denny Hamlin could go on and win his appeal, but we'll have to wait and see what happens with regards to that. But it's also funny and interesting to see all the drivers speaking out about the situation as well, because I'm not surprised that they're speaking about it. And again, I think it's interesting. It'll be something we're going to be watching as time goes on, but it's interesting the drivers had these reactions to that. Really interesting stuff for sure. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about Josh Williams. Now, the best part of the NASCAR Xfinity Series race till the end was Josh Williams. So, at the end of the early portion of the NASCAR Xfinity Series race, Josh Williams had some contact and got involved in a wreck that Kyle Weatherman was involved in. We already talked about Kyle Weatherman having a sprain on his hand, but Kyle Weatherman had a flat tire, and Josh Williams got some damage. So, basically, Josh Williams, they put some Bear Bond on his car. Here's the problem. Bear Bond needs heat. And it was so cold on the track that Bear Bond got back on the racetrack. So, NASCAR, with his frustration, how many caution laps there have been, NASCAR told Josh Berry to park his car. And Josh Berry does not specifically tell where to park his car. So, Josh Berry goes on the front stretch and stops his car, gives the peace sign to the crowd, waves to officials up in the stands, and walks back to the racetrack and basically has some interesting comments saying, what are they going to do? Fine me? Basically, then, he was escorted to the infield care center, and then he was escorted to where the NASCAR hauler to have a conversation with Wayne Audit. And they told Josh Williams to not leave the NASCAR hauler and sit in the NASCAR hauler. Basically told him to sit in the hauler for the rest of the race and could not leave. Now, multiple drivers have said that they will pay his fine, whatever penalties he deserves, including Denny Hamlin and David Ray, who said they will go ahead and pay the penalties that Josh Williams could end up receiving. Now, after a while, Josh Williams was eventually allowed to leave the media center, and he spoke to the media saying that he was also frustrated and thought it was a little bit unfair what ended up happening, but he does have a lot of respect for Wayne Auden and the race directing crew and the people doing the job. Now, obviously, this was one of the biggest talking points of the NASCAR Xfinity Series race, and in my opinion, I understand NASCAR being frustrated with Josh Williams in that instance because Josh Williams basically brought another caution out. Here's the problem, though. I think the fact that they told him to park him, they've really never done that rule before, and the fact that they decided to go ahead and penalize him for it, I thought was a little bit ridiculous in my honest opinion. And I know Josh Williams, because he stopped, is probably going to get a penalty. I don't expect him to not get one, but Josh Williams, in my opinion, sticking it to the man and sticking it to NASCAR, I thought was really, really cool and really hilarious. And I think Josh Williams became an overnight sensation. And Josh Williams is someone who I've had a lot of respect for over the years, and my respect for Josh Williams went up. I know some people were calling it childish what Josh Williams did, but I have no problem with what Josh Williams did, considering NASCAR, I think, lashed their frustration out on Josh Williams completely ridiculously. I understand him being frustrated about all the caution laps, but hey, you would have had so many caution laps if it didn't take you 12 laps, mind you, 12 laps to get a 3-car pileup done. It's your fault for how many caution laps there were in NASCAR because your procedures could have been a lot quicker and your race direction could have been a lot better. I do think Josh Williams, unfortunately, probably will get a suspension potentially and a pretty hefty fine. We got drivers that might support him and want to support him, and I love Josh Williams a lot. And Josh Williams, we still love you, man. And I think Josh Williams became an overnight sensation and a fan favorite. So happy for sure and glad to see Josh Williams became an overnight sensation. And now we're going to jump on to the first of 3 major stories in today's episode as we are talking about Kurt Busch and Gunther Steiner. As it was announced yesterday at the end of stage number 2 that Kurt Busch and Gunther Steiner are going to join the Fox Sports booth this upcoming weekend at Circuit of the Americas. First, we kind of already knew that Kurt Busch was going to be in the Fox Sports booth for the Cup race at Circuit of the Americas because Kurt Busch kind of revealed, and I think it was Adam Cheek, who works at Front Stretch, kind of revealed that on Twitter that Kurt Busch was likely going to be in the Fox Sports booth. Kurt Busch, in my opinion, I've been wanting to have in the Fox Sports booth this year, and we're finally going to get an opportunity to have him in the Fox Sports booth at Circuit of the Americas. I think we'll probably hear a little more about his recovery process throughout the week and how he's been doing, and I'm just so excited because Kurt Busch, I've enjoyed him in the Fox Sports booth, and when he's been up in the commentary booth, he always does a really good job. He's always passionate. He's not over-aggressive, and I think he's going to be very fun to have in the booth. But Gunther Steiner is going to be in the Fox Sports booth at COTA. That one surprised me. Now, Gunther Steiner does have some experience being in NASCAR. He actually worked at Red Bull Racing for transitioning over to Haas. He actually started Red Bull Racing for a long time and helped build a lot of success over at the Red Bull organization. Then he went to Haas and now is the technical director for Haas F1. But it's so cool that Gunther Steiner is coming in to be a commentator. And Gunther Steiner is probably going to be unfiltered, so I cannot wait for him to slip up because I think that's going to be really funny when he does make a slip up. I'm just so excited for both these guys to be in the booth. I think that the Fox Sports booth for this week especially is going to be really, really fun. And like I said, I'm looking forward to have, especially Kurt Busch. Kurt Busch being in the booth, one of my favorites of the year. I think he's going to do better than all the other commentators have done this year. Yes, I think he's going to do better than Tony. I think he's going to do better than what Danica has done this year. But having Kurt back in the booth for the first time this year, it's really fun. I'm excited he's going to be back at the racetrack. He's been working with 2311, doing a lot of consulting and stuff, and we're likely to hear a lot more about what's going on with Kurt. But I'm just so happy to see him. And Gunther Steiner being in the booth was not on the bingo card for me. I did not expect that, but I think it's just so awesome and great that you get to see both these guys join the Fox Sports booth for this weekend at COTA in Texas. Is going to be fun. It makes a lot of sense for Gunther to come in a little bit, though, because Gunther, and of course, this is where the F1 race is at COTA, so it makes a lot of sense to bring someone in like Gunther, but I'm really happy both these guys are coming into play. I'm glad they're going to be in the Fox booth. It's going to be really fun to have both of them in the Fox booth this weekend, and I'm excited that both Gunther Steiner and Kurt Busch are going to be in the Fox Sports booth. I'm looking forward to it. I'm pumped about it, excited they'll be in the booth this weekend at Circuit of the Americas on Fox. And now we'll go ahead and jump on to the first of 2 major stories in today's episode, as we are talking about Busch Beer. As it was reported by Adam Stern yesterday that Trackhouse, it also remains the expected landing spot for Busch Beer starting in 2024 For people familiar with the matter, an official announcement could come within the next few weeks. Now, we kind of talked about this on the channel a couple weeks ago when it does come to Busch Beer, but with Kevin Harvick retiring at the end of the year, they are rumored to leave Stewart Racing and head to Trackhouse Racing and sponsor Ross Chastain for the 2024 season. Now, obviously, how many races would they sponsor Ross Chastain? If they were to sponsor Ross Chastain, they probably would sponsor Ross Chastain for quite a few races. Now, obviously, he's not the only one that is a favorite candidate. Kyle Busch's name has been also somewhat brought up in conversations, but a lot of that is due to the fact that Kyle Busch basically has had an association with his name, and it would be cool if Kyle Busch got an opportunity to have the A Budweiser car. But Chastain being a favorite makes a lot of sense. Ross Chastain is kind of like a blue-collar individual. Probably also drinks a lot of beer, probably watermelon-flavored beer, because Ross Chastain, of course, grows a lot of watermelons. But overall, this isn't a big surprise or shock to me that Busch Beer right now is the current favorite to pick up that sponsorship. Because, again, Busch Beer with the sponsorship that Chastain has, it makes a lot of sense, too, because Chastain's a blue-collar guy, and a lot of people are big fans of it. And if anyone's going to replace him, Kevin Harvick, when it comes to that, it's going to be Ross Chastain. It does make a lot of sense. And it just shows what Trackhouse is doing at the moment when it comes to their sponsorship and funding. They've got a lot of sponsorship funding currently at the moment at that team. They got Quaker State now, and they've got a lot of companies coming in to sponsor Ross Chastain because Trackhouse is able to bring in a lot of sponsors and a lot of funding. So isn't a big surprise or shock right there. But with Busch Beer expected to leave Stewart Racing and head over to Trackhouse Racing, the big question is now going to be what driver is going to go to the 4-car next year too, because if Busch Beer leaves, you're now going to have to bring some sponsorship funding if you're going to go to the 4-car next year. Obviously, there's a lot of drivers who could be candidates for the 4-car next year. We've heard names like Erik Jones come up into conversations as potential candidates. Jahar Nemechek's has been absolutely brought up into conversations. Reese Stenhouse Jr. has been brought up into conversations. Hell, I think at one point even people were throwing out Hailie Deegan at one point, though I don't think she's even close to being ready to make a jump over there. And we've seen other drivers like Zane Smith been brought up into conversations. Riley Herbst, Cole Custer, among the drivers that also been brought up into conversations. It's going to be very interesting to see what driver is going to go over there because they're going to have to bring sponsors and funding. Zane Smith does have some sponsorship funding. He does. We know that for sure. Erik Jones really doesn't, so that might hurt Erik Jones' chances. But I think Stewart Racing could find a way to acclimate. But I'm also worried about Stewart Racing after this season because if you lose Busch Beer, and you're already losing Kevin Harvick, but if you're like losing Busch Beer, SHR's future, I think, is in question. I'm worried about this team. They've struggled this season outside of Kevin Harvick, who was at one point the points leader. He's dropped back to 5th due to his bad finish at Atlanta. But outside of them, Chase Briscoe is the highest in points to Stewart Racing, and he's 23rd in points. It's been a strong start for them, and I'm worried about SHR. So they need to bring someone in there who is going to be extremely competitive. So I'm a little worried about it going forward, and I'm a little worried about the potential there. But I am also not surprised or shocked in the slightest that Busch Beer will go into a Trackhouse Racing like to sponsor Ross Chastain. I would love for them, though, to sponsor Kyle Busch as well. I would love for Kyle Busch to have a full season sponsor, and it'd be cool if Kyle Busch got it, and we can get a throwback Budweiser car. I think that'd be really, really cool, and hopefully there does an opportunity that comes into play where we potentially could see the opportunity come into play where we see them potentially sponsor Kyle Busch this season. I think that'd be really, really fun and really cool overall for sure. We'll see what happens, though, but it sounds like Busch Beer is likely going to go and sponsor Trackhouse Racing. Not a shock or surprise about that for sure. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the final major story of today's episode as we're talking about lack of respect on the racetrack. Now, obviously, this is a question that always comes up every year, is about the lack of respect on track. And Kyle Busch was one among the drivers who spoke about the lack of respect on track. Basically, Kyle Busch spoke to the media. He basically talked about the situation he and Chandler Smith had at Phoenix Race. He said he had a teammate, the driver, who was basically one of his drivers in the truck series of Kyle Busch Motorsports, that being Chandler Smith, who had contact at Phoenix. Kyle Busch says he tries to talk to the guys. They don't listen about the respect on track and called out the fact that there has been a lack of respect on track. Erik Jones also spoke to the media and shout out to Darian Gilliam, a.k.a. Black Lives Matter, for basically tweeting this out. But Erik Jones basically says that he basically learned over the years to gain a lot of respect on the racetrack. And he's learning that in 2023, is learning to have a lot more respect on the racetrack and not race way in over his head, and is putting up a lot of great performances with the Legacy Motor Club team. Now, Joey Logano also spoke about the lack of respect on track, And he says, where is the line when it comes to that respect on track, when it comes to contact and stuff? And a lot of that does come from what happened with Denny Hamlin and Ross Chastain, with Denny Hamlin intentionally getting into Ross Chastain, but also getting payback on Ross Chastain at the same time as well. And when I look at the situation, when it comes to the lack of respect on track, I 100% agree. I agree with Kyle Busch 100%. He says these guys in the lower series have had a lack of respect. And a lot of people bring up, well, Kyle Busch hires some of these guys that bring in money and don't have respect on track. But we have to all remember is that Kyle Busch is trying to pay the bills every single week. And he's unfortunately going to have to hire sometimes drivers that may not have as much respect on the track. But if they bring the sponsorship funding, he's going to have to hire him. The hope is that in the future that can change and we can bring more talented drivers in who are going to be more respectful on the track, because I agree with Kyle Busch 100%. Kyle Busch, in my opinion, has become one of the most cleanest drivers and respectful drivers on the racetrack over the last couple of years. I think that there have been so many drivers that have come up over the last few years, and a lot of younger drivers for that matter, that don't show that same respect. And it frustrates the older drivers. They get frustrated about the lack of respect. And even some of the younger drivers who are getting a little bit up there in age a little more now, but they're getting also frustrated with the lack of respect on track for some of even the younger drivers coming into play. Because a lot of these drivers are alive now, were basically born after Dale Earnhardt's passing. And I think drivers race with a lot more respect back then than they do now. And I think the truth is that there is a big issue when it comes to having respect on the racetrack. And I think it does need to change going forward, because the fact that you have drivers that get frustrated, we've seen drivers over the years, especially in the Truck Series and the Xfinity Series, get frustrated about not getting respected on the racetrack. And also, we've seen Hailie Deegan. She's talked about the fact she doesn't get respect on the racetrack really much. She went to Xfinity, and she performed very, very good in debut. And the drivers around her raced her with a lot more class and a lot more respect. I think as these drivers do get older, their respect will go up, and it will show a lot more respect on the track. But again, there is a huge problem with this. There's a lot of drivers racing way over their heads. The reason is because they bring sponsorship and they bring funding. And you get races like what we saw in Atlanta, where it was just a disaster overall, where guys were wrecking. And then you had, of course, that Daniel Hemrick intentionally wrecked Parker Kligerman. Hammer's been in the series now for nearly 10 years. And he got into Parker Kligerman and turned him intentionally on the last lap of the race. And there's just such a problem with this lack of respect on the track. And it needs to change quickly. And I hope it does change quickly, because it's been very frustrating to see the lack of respect on track. It gets frustrating as a fan. And I agree 100% that it needs to change quickly. Again, I love aggressive racing, but I also want clean racing as well. I don't want to see races with a lot of cautions. The Cup Series has not had a lot of cautions this year, and I think there's been a lot of respectful racing, but also you have Ross Chastain out there. Though I will say Ross Chastain is a driver I do have a lot of respect for out there. So it is what it is when it comes to the situation, but I don't blame Kyle Busch for calling out the lack of respect on racetrack. He's a driver in the sport for a long time. I think he's earned the respect, and he's a driver a lot of people do respect in the industry. And if anyone's going to call out this, it makes a lot of sense for a veteran driver to call out this issue. And I agree. It needs to change quickly, and I hope it does change in the future, because I want to see a lot more respect on the tracks. It'd be fun to watch these races more, and hopefully in the future we can see less lack of respect on the track and more respect on the track going forward, because I think that the more respect you have on the racetrack, I think the better the product is going to be. You can have aggressive racing, but can't have over-aggressive racing, in my opinion. So, that is for today's long NASCAR news and motorsports news video. I want to thank you guys for watching. Please like and subscribe to the channel. Notifications on so you know if I win a video does go live on my channel. Follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and support me on Patreon as well. Links are over that, and comment your thoughts below on today's video. Do you agree with Kyle Busch's comments about the lack of respect on the track? Let me know in the comments below. And what are your thoughts about Busch Beer still expected to go to Trackhouse Racing? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Later today on the channel, we have the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series race picks for the race. Tomorrow on the channel, we have the NASCAR Cup Series entry list and also Xfinity Series race picks for COTA. Wednesday can be a NASCAR news video and also the paint schemes for the week. Thursday will only be race picks on the channel for the Cup race at COTA. Friday will be another NASCAR news video, among other things. And then we have a lot of other content on the way coming out, and some special videos that are going to be coming out in the not-so-distant future. So anyways, like I said, I want to thank you guys for watching today's episode, and I'll see you guys next time for more great, awesome NASCAR content and other motorsports content on the channel like this. Take care, everybody.